The mistake most people make with Social Security is not that they claim too early, it is that they think too small. They look at the statement, stare at one monthly number, and ask a narrow question: can I get a little more? Can I squeeze another $200 out of this? Can I wait another year? Can I start? Now, that is not the real question. The real question is whether you understand that Social Security is one of the few inflation-adjusted lifetime income streams most ordinary Americans will ever own, and whether you know how to price it correctly before you make an irreversible decision. I have spent a lifetime watching people misunderstand value. They do it with stocks, they do it with businesses, and they do it with retirement. They confuse activity with progress, noise with insight, and size with usefulness. Social Security gets dragged into the same confusion. People either dismiss it as government money that is not worth planning around, or they cling to it emotionally without understanding the rules that actually drive the check. That is how households leave a great deal of lifetime security on the table. If you are in your late 50s or your 60s, this matters more than most of what passes for retirement advice. Not because Social Security is the whole plan, it is not, but because once you understand how the system is built, you stop treating the decision like a guess and start treating it like capital allocation. And capital allocation, done well, changes lives. Here is the hard truth. For many people, the difference between an anxious retirement and a confident one is not a miracle stock pick, not another year obsessing over market headlines, and not some heroic budget that turns life into punishment. It is understanding how to increase the floor under your life. That is what Social Security can do when you handle it with care. I want to give you a better frame for this. Most people think of Social Security as a check. I think of it as a contract tied to your earnings record, your claiming age, your spouse, if you have one, your longevity, and your willingness to delay gratification when the math justifies it. Once you see it that way, 5 practical moves stop looking like random tactics and start fitting together as part of one larger system. That system is simple. How much of your work history counts, how strong those counted years are, when you activate the benefit, how your spouse changes the value of the decision, and whether the government is even using the right numbers in the first place. That is the game. Now let me make the deeper point. Retirement is not won by having the single biggest pile of money. It is won by matching dependable income, flexible assets, low tax friction, and human behavior in a way that lets you sleep well. Social Security is one of the rare pieces of that machine that comes with inflation protection built in. That matters because inflation is not a theory. It is a thief. It chips away quietly. It turns a number that felt safe 10 years ago into a number that now feels thin. $1 of guaranteed income that rises over time is worth more than most people think, especially when they reach the stage of life where mistakes hurt more, and second chances arrive less often. So if you want to increase your Social Security benefit, you should understand what the engine is actually doing. The engine begins with work. Every year you work and pay Social Security taxes, the system logs your earnings. There is a ceiling on how much wage income counts in any one year, and that ceiling rises over time with wage growth. Then the system does something many people miss. It adjusts earlier earnings for wage growth so that your old dollars can be compared more fairly with newer dollars. That is why an old middle-class salary from decades ago may count as more than the raw number suggests. After that, the system takes your 35 highest years, not your favorite years, not your most recent years, not your hardest years, your 35 highest years. And if you do not have 35 years, zeros get dropped into the empty slots. That one rule alone explains why so many people are disappointed when they first start studying their statement. They thought effort was the measuring stick. The formula cares about counted years and counted earnings. Those years are averaged into a monthly figure, and then the government runs that figure through a progressive formula that replaces a higher percentage of lower earnings and a smaller percentage of higher earnings. That is by design. Social Security is a base layer, not a full lifestyle replacement plan. Then comes the decision that people can actually control. When you claim, for most people, the earliest claiming age is 62. If your full retirement age is 67 and you claim at 62, the reduction is substantial and permanent. If you delay beyond full retirement age, the benefit rises until age 70. Waiting beyond 70 does not keep increasing the monthly amount. That is the skeleton. Now let us turn it into something useful. The first way to increase your Social Security benefit is the one most people already know, but very few truly value: delay the claim when the economics support it. I am not saying everyone should wait. I do not believe in universal answers for financial questions that live inside real human lives. If your health is poor, if you need the cash, if your family history tells a different story, If your job disappeared, if your stress is chewing you alive, that all matters. A financial decision that ignores biology, marriage, and peace of mind is not wisdom. It is arithmetic without judgment. But if you are healthy enough, have other resources, and can bridge the gap sensibly, delay deserves more respect than it gets. Why? Because when you delay, you are buying more guaranteed income for life. Imagine your full retirement age benefit would be $2,500 a month. Claiming at 62 might pull that number down to around $1,750. Waiting until 70 could push it to roughly $3,100. That is not tiny improvement. That is a structural change in the cash flow of your future. The gap between the early claim and the later claim is about $1,350 a month before future inflation adjustments compound on top of it. Over a long retirement that can amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional lifetime income. Now think like an allocator. If I offered you the chance to buy a larger inflation-protected paycheck backed by the government lasting as long as you live, most people would at least pause and take the offer seriously. Yet that is effectively what many households are choosing between. Instead, they often frame the decision emotionally. They say, I want my money now, I paid in, I might die early, the government may change the rules. My cousin claimed at 62 and feels great. That is not analysis. That is fear wearing the mask of confidence. I have seen the same pattern in markets. People reach for what is immediate because certainty today feels more comfortable than advantage tomorrow. Good investing often requires tolerating that discomfort. So does good retirement planning. Still, there is a second layer to this. Delaying is not just about getting a bigger number. It is about raising the fixed floor under the household. In your 70s and 80s, you may care less about maximizing your portfolio and more about making sure the bills are covered, even if markets disappoint. Memory gets foggy, or one spouse is left managing the house alone. That is when an extra several $100s a month can feel less like theory and more like oxygen. The second way to increase your Social Security benefit is less glamorous. But for some people, it is the cleanest opportunity on the board. Work at least 35 years. That sounds almost insultingly obvious. But obvious does not mean unimportant. The formula uses 35 years. If you only have 30, then 5 zeros are sitting in the math like dead weight. Replacing a zero with a real earnings year can improve the average. Replacing a weak year with a stronger one can do the same. This matters especially for people who had career breaks. Maybe you cared for children. Maybe you cared for parents. Maybe you started a business and paid yourself almost nothing. Maybe life simply did not move in a straight line. The formula does not care why the years are missing. It only knows what counts. So let us say someone worked 31 years and had 4 zeros in the record. If that person now earns $60,000 for one more year, a zero does not get replaced with another zero. It gets replaced with $60,000 of counted earnings. That improvement is then spread over the formula. 1 year alone will not create magic, but several years can raise the monthly benefit in a meaningful way. Here is the subtle point. Not every additional working year is equally valuable. If you already have more than 35 years, then a new year helps only if it knocks out one of the weaker years in the top 35. If the year it replaces was already fairly strong, the improvement may be modest. But if the old year was very low or zero, the improvement can be real. That is why retirement planning should not rely on slogans. Work longer is not always smart. Work longer with a weak earnings record can be smart. Work much longer in a soul-crushing job when the gain is tiny can be foolish. Again, the point is judgment. And let me say something that often gets lost in personal finance. Time is an asset. Healthy time is an even rarer asset. If another year of work meaningfully strengthens your household for decades, that may be a good trade. If another year merely adds a little more to an already secure pile while costing you energy, family time, and physical freedom, it may be an expensive trade. You need to know which one you are making. The third way to increase your Social Security benefit is to increase your earnings while they still count. This one sounds irritating because it lands on an uncomfortable truth. The formula rewards stronger earnings histories. That does not mean everyone can wave a wand and earn more. Life is not that neat. But many people in their 50s and 60s do have more control here than they assume. A better job, a higher paid final chapter, a side business that produces real taxable earnings, a consulting role after leaving full-time work, an extra few years in the strongest compensation period of your life. All of that can matter. Suppose one of the low years in your top 35 is $30,000. And now you are earning $95,000. Replacing the weaker year with a stronger year lifts the average Social Security is not going to reward you dollar for dollar forever because the formula is progressive and there is an annual taxable cap. But the lift is still real when the new years are materially better than the old ones. The human side of this is interesting. A lot of people hit their late 50s and behave as if the game is basically over. They stop negotiating, they stop repositioning, they stop treating the next few work years as strategically important. That can be a mistake. Sometimes the last stretch of your career is not about saving every extra dollar. It is about upgrading the quality of the years that count in the formula, while also strengthening the bridge between work and retirement. Maybe you do not need 10 more years, maybe you need 2 better years. There's a huge difference. And if you are self-employed, there is another lesson. Some people spend years minimizing reported income for tax reasons and then are surprised later when the Social Security benefit is thin. You cannot starve the system for decades and then expect it to feed you like a king. Lower taxes in the present can mean lower guaranteed income later. That does not mean every tax-saving tactic is bad. It means trade-offs are real and trade-offs should be acknowledged. Honestly, the fourth way to increase the household's Social Security outcome is to coordinate spousal benefits properly. This is where many people stop acting like a household and start acting like two disconnected claim forms. That is a mistake. If you are married, Social Security is not just your benefit and your spouse's benefit sitting side by side. It is an interlocking system. A spouse can receive up to half of the worker's primary insurance amount if claimed at the spouse's own full retirement age, though taking it early can reduce the amount. Survivor benefits are different again. After one spouse dies, the surviving spouse generally keeps the higher of the two benefits, not both. Those two rules change everything. Let me put it plainly in many marriages. The higher earner is not just making a decision for himself or herself. The higher earner is also setting the size of the survivor's future income floor. That means a delayed claim by the higher earner can be far more valuable than people realize. If the higher earner waits and locks in a materially larger monthly benefit, the surviving spouse may later inherit that larger number. For a widow or widower living alone in old age, that can mean the difference between comfort and constant pressure. This is not abstract. One spouse dies, one income disappears. The house still needs heat. Insurance still needs to be paid. The grocery bill does not vanish. Grief is hard enough. Poverty on top of grief is cruelty. That is why I dislike simplistic advice in this area. People say things like, always claim early, or always wait until 70. Neither sentence is intelligent on its own. The right answer depends on health, age gaps, asset levels, tax strategy, work plans, and the importance of the survivor benefit. But households that never study the spouse and survivor rules often leave real money behind. Here is a pattern that can make sense in some families. The lower earner may claim earlier, bringing some income into the household, while the higher earner delays longer, building the larger, lifelong and survivor benefit. Not always, but often enough that it deserves serious modeling. And there is a psychological benefit to getting this right. When couples plan together, the retirement decision stops feeling like a tug of war between two anxious people and starts feeling like a joint operating plan. That reduces fear. Clarity is calming, which brings me to the fifth way to increase your Social Security benefit. Check the earnings record for errors. This is the least glamorous move and one of the most practical. The government keeps an earnings history. If that history is wrong, your benefit can be wrong. Think about the asymmetry here. If the record is correct, you lose a little time checking. If the record is wrong and you fix it, you may improve a benefit that could last the rest of your life. That is a very favorable bet. At minimum, review the earnings history and look for years that seem off. Compare suspicious years with old tax returns or W-2 records if you still have them. The farther back you go, the more paperwork may be needed, but a small correction today can ripple across decades of payments tomorrow. People ignore this because it feels administrative. That is exactly why it matters. Big financial outcomes are often driven by boring things that other people postpone. Now, I want to pull all of this together into the larger Buffett lesson because the 5 tactics alone are not the real value. The real value is the identity shift. Most workers spend their lives training themselves to think in one direction: earn, save, endure. Repeat. That is a decent script for building capital. It is not enough for living well after the main working years. At some point, you must stop thinking like an employee who receives a paycheck and start thinking like a manager of income streams. That is the identity flip. And Social Security is often the first place where that flip becomes visible. Before that moment, the benefit feels like a distant number on a statement. After that moment, it becomes part of a living architecture. One stream may be guaranteed and inflation adjusted, another may be portfolio withdrawals, another may be a pension, another may be part-time work, another may be cash reserves for market turbulence, another may be the flexibility created by lower spending. Once you see the whole machine, you stop asking childish questions like, what is the maximum monthly check I can get if I push one button? You start asking adult questions. What claiming age creates the strongest floor for the household? What bridge assets let us delay without strain? How does this decision interact with taxes, Roth conversions, and Medicare premiums? How does it change the survivor's life if one of us dies first? How much portfolio risk can we reduce by buying more guaranteed income through delay? How much freedom does this extra guaranteed income purchase in our 70s and 80s? That is where wisdom lives. I have also learned that people chronically undervalue certainty when they are healthy and overvalue it once fear finally arrives. When markets are strong and work is still possible, they dismiss guaranteed income as dull. When illness comes, when a spouse dies, when memory slips, when the market drops 20% right as withdrawals begin. Suddenly dull looks beautiful. So, do not evaluate Social Security only through the eyes of your current self. Evaluate it through the eyes of your older self. The person who may be more tired, the person who may care less about squeezing return and more about protecting dignity, the person who may be living alone, the person who may not want to make hard financial decisions in a bad year. That future self deserves representation in the room. Let me give you a concrete household picture. Suppose a married couple has investment assets, maybe a paid-down house, and enough flexibility to live on one income plus modest withdrawals for a few years. The higher earner's full retirement age benefit is projected at $3,000 a month. Claiming at 62 might reduce that materially. Waiting until 70 could push it far higher. The lower earner has a smaller benefit or perhaps a spousal option. Now imagine they are tempted to claim both benefits early because it feels safer. In the short run, they get money sooner. In the long run, they lock in lower guaranteed income forever, and they may also reduce what the surviving spouse can rely on later. That is not automatically wrong, but it is expensive if they had the balance sheet and the health to wait. Now flip the picture. Suppose another household is in shaky health, carries less savings, or simply cannot tolerate the gap between retirement and a later claim date. For them, claiming earlier may be entirely reasonable. The mistake would be pretending that they are making the same decision as the first couple, same program, very different economics. This is why retirement planning frustrates so many people. They want a slogan. What they need is a blueprint. So here is the blueprint. I would want a sensible family to build first. Get the statements, not guesses, not memories, not what you think the number was last year. Get the actual Social Security projections for both spouses, if there are two of you. Second, inspect the earnings record. Do not assume the database is perfect. Third, count the 35-year issue honestly. Are there zeros? Are there weak years that could still be replaced? Are the final working years unusually strong? Fourth, map the claiming ages side by side. What happens at 62? Full retirement age, 68, 69, and 70. What does the survivor benefit look like under each path? Fifth, identify the bridge. If you delay benefits, what funds the gap? Cash, a taxable account, Roth money, part-time work, a severance package, a pension, selling a property. 6. Connect Social Security to the tax map, because a larger guaranteed benefit later may allow you to spend down volatile assets differently, delay portfolio withdrawals, or coordinate better with conversions and required distributions. 7th, connect the numbers to the life. What are you protecting? What are you trying to make possible? Travel while knees still work. A less anxious widowhood for a spouse. Freedom from sequence risk. Less dependence on market returns in old age. More permission to spend, because the floor is stronger. Money is only useful when it serves a human outcome. That is the whole point. Now let me give you a warning. There is a bad habit in retirement planning. People optimize one lever in isolation and accidentally damage the whole machine. They maximize the Social Security check but ignore taxes, or they minimize taxes and ignore survivor risk, or they preserve every investment dollar and never allow themselves to buy safety, or they take benefits too early because they hate drawing from savings, even when waiting would have raised guaranteed income dramatically. This is why I keep returning to the same principle. Do not chase the biggest number in one box. Build the strongest system across all the boxes. A household with a slightly smaller portfolio and a better income design can be wealthier in the only way that matters. They can be wealthier in confidence, and confidence in retirement is not a mood. It is a product of structure. One more thing needs to be said, because it is rarely said bluntly enough. Many people are not actually trying to maximize wealth. They are trying to minimize regret. That is understandable. Retirement decisions feel permanent, because in some ways they are. Once you claim early, you have changed the stream. Once years pass, the opportunity to wait disappears forever. So people try to eliminate regret by rushing to certainty. They say, at least if I claim now, I know what I am getting. But certainty obtained too cheaply can become its own regret. The better approach is to do the work up front, run the scenarios, name the trade-offs, decide what kind of risk matters most: longevity risk, market risk, widowhood risk, inflation risk, health risk, tax risk. Then make the decision that best fits the life you are actually living, not the one a television host, a comment section warrior, or a neighbor insists is universally correct. The strongest retirement plans are rarely the most fashionable ones. They are the most coherent ones. And coherence begins with knowing what you own. You own a claim on future Social Security benefits. You may be able to enlarge that claim by waiting. You may be able to enlarge it by replacing zeros or weak years. You may be able to enlarge it by earning more in the years that still count. You may be able to enlarge the household result by coordinating spouse and survivor decisions wisely, and you may be able to enlarge it simply by correcting an error that should never have been there in the first place. 5 moves, 1 system, 1 objective, raise the floor under the rest of your life. If I were sitting across the table from you, that is the final test I would give you. Not, what is the highest benefit you can possibly manufacture on paper? Not, what did your brother-in-law do? Not, what sounds emotionally satisfying this month? I would ask you this: will the Social Security choice you are about to make leave your household more resilient 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and on the day one spouse is forced to live on 1 check instead of 2? That is the real exam. If the answer is yes, you are probably thinking clearly. If the answer is I do not know, then do not confuse motion with wisdom. Slow down, pull the statements, check the record model, the ages, study the spouse, price the survivor benefit, build the bridge, then decide. Because retirement is not won by guessing. It is won by understanding which promises are valuable, which choices are permanent, and which pieces of income will still be standing when life gets hard. That is why Social Security deserves more respect than it gets. Handled poorly, it becomes another missed opportunity. Handled well, it becomes one of the strongest pillars in the entire structure. And when the structure is sound, you do not just get a bigger check. You get more freedom, more patience, more dignity, more room to live the years ahead on your own terms. That is a very good trade, and it is worth getting right.